Welcome back to Investing Music Podcast. Today, we're looking at MP Materials.
MP Materials.
Yeah.
Okay.
The only company in the U.S. that's mining and processing these rare earth elements.
Yeah, that's right. They're in a pretty unique position right now.
They are, and their stock ticker symbol MP has been on a bit of a roller coaster ride lately. Surged last month when there was news about those tariffs, and another jump back in December when China made that announcement about those export bans.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And then just this week,
Mm-hmm.
their stock closed up almost 5% after they just crushed those fourth quarter earnings.
Wow.
They're expanding like crazy with these new facilities they've got, and they're producing record amounts of materials.
It's a really something.
Plus, there's all this talk about this potential U.S.-Ukraine mineral deal.
Right. Yeah, I've heard about that.
So there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, there is.
So I think maybe we should start with the basics.
Okay. Yeah.
What exactly are rare earth elements?
Okay.
And why should investors even care about them?
So rare earth elements are basically a group of 17 metals that are like essential
Okay.
for a whole bunch of different technologies
Got it.
that we use every single day.
Okay.
And they have these really unique magnetic and conductive properties that you just can't really replicate with
Interesting.
any other materials.
Like what?
So think about like smartphones,
Okay.
electric vehicles,
Mhm.
wind turbines,
Mhm.
even defense systems, like
Yeah.
all these things,
Wow.
like they're critical components in all of them.
So they're kind of a big deal then.
Yeah, you could say that.
Okay, and you mentioned this potential U.S.-Ukraine minerals deal.
Right.
What's the latest on that?
Well, there's no like official agreement just yet,
Mm.
but things seem to be moving pretty quickly.
Okay.
And basically the idea is that the U.S. would get access to like a pretty big chunk of Ukraine's mineral resources,
Okay.
including those rare earths.
Okay.
So, this has like some pretty big implications, especially for a company like MP Materials.
That's what I was thinking. So what does this potential deal mean for them?
Okay.
Like, could this be a game changer?
It definitely has the potential to be. Like,
Right.
imagine if the U.S. secures access to all these Ukrainian resources,
Right.
MP Materials, as the only company in the U.S. right now that's actually processing rare earths.
Yeah.
They would be like a key player in that supply chain.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah, for sure. And, I remember reading something about President Trump, pushing for this deal back when he was in office.
Right.
Is like a way to reduce our reliance on China.
Exactly.
Is that part of what's going on here?
Absolutely. So like right now, China pretty much dominates the
Mhm.
global rare earth market.
Yeah.
But this deal, along with those potential tariffs on Chinese imports,
Right.
it's part of like this bigger strategy to kind of diversify
Okay.
the supply sources
Mhm.
and bring more of that production back to the U.S.
Okay. So even if prices drop a bit with, the influx of Ukrainian materials,
Yeah.
having more control over that supply chain
Mm-hmm.
could be like a huge advantage for MP Materials in the long run.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a trade-off,
Yeah.
potentially for more competition versus more market share
Right.
and, a more secure supply chain.
Got it. And it's important to note that, MP Materials isn't just digging these elements out of the ground.
Yeah, no, they're not.
They're vertically integrated, meaning
Wow.
they control that whole process from the mining to the refining.
Yep, all of it.
They've even got that new facility in Fort Worth
Right.
where they're producing that neodymium praseodymium metal
Yeah,
and those magnets,
that's right.
which are essential for those high-performance applications.
Yeah, those are key.
NDP magnets.
DP magnets, yep.
Those are used in like a ton of cutting-edge technology, right?
Yeah, like a lot. Think about like high-efficiency electric motors,
Okay.
wind turbines,
Mhm.
even things like MRI machines.
Wow.
And by controlling, the whole process from raw materials to these high-value products, MP Materials is in a really strong position to capture more of the profits
Yeah.
along the way.
So they're not just, riding the wave of rare earth demand. They're building the surfboard, too.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, they are.
So it sounds pretty promising,
Yeah,
but I'm sure there are some risks involved as well.
of course there are.
What are some of the challenges that MP Materials might face moving forward?
Well, as with any company, execution is key.
Yeah.
They need to be able to scale up production to meet all this growing demand.
Mm.
And any delays in getting those new facilities up and running
Right.
could really hurt them.
And I imagine the global economy plays a role as well.
Of course.
What if demand for electric vehicles or renewable energy slows down?
Absolutely. If there's a global recession,
Yeah.
that would likely impact demand for a lot of the products
Right.
that use rare earths.
Okay, and we can't ignore the, potential for policy changes down the line either.
All right. Yeah.
While the current administration is really pushing for this domestic rare earth production,
Yeah.
a future administration might have completely different priorities.
Exactly. You never know.
So investors really need to keep an eye on that bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of investors, let's talk about MP Materials stock performance.
Okay.
Ticker symbol MP has been on a bit of a roller coaster lately. What's driving all that volatility?
Well, so on February 21st, their stock closed at $24.30.
Okay.
A 4.83% jump for the day right after they beat their Q4 earnings estimates.
Wow.
But that comes after, a 12.4% surge in January when those tariffs were being discussed,
Right.
and a 10.2% jump back in December when China announced those export bans.
Wow. That's a lot of movement.
It really is.
So what does this all mean for investors?
Okay.
Is MP Materials a buy right now?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at some potential investment scenarios.
Let's do it.
All right, so for the short term,
Okay.
let's say the next 1 to 3 months,
Mm-hmm.
that momentum that we've been seeing,
Yeah.
driven by, those strong earnings, the whispers about potential tariffs, and all the buzz around that U.S.-Ukraine deal,
Right.
could push MP even higher, maybe to $26 or beyond.
So there's potential for a quick gain, but also, a lot of risk in such a short time frame.
Right, exactly.
What about a longer term outlook?
Okay, so for a midterm outlook, let's say 6 to 12 months,
Okay.
MP Materials, vertical integration, and those potential policy changes point towards continued growth.
Okay.
As they ramp up production and start seeing profits from those new facilities,
Mm-hmm.
the stock could climb towards $30 or higher.
Okay. So a little less of a gamble than the short-term play, but potentially, less explosive growth as well.
Yeah, that's fair.
What about investors with an even longer time horizon?
Okay.
Say 2 to 3 years out.
Now that's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
If MP Materials executes on their plans, they could be in a phenomenal position to really capitalize on the long-term growth of the rare earth market.
Interesting.
Some analysts are even predicting that the stock could hit $100 in the next few years.
$100?
Yeah, $100.
Okay, now you've got my attention.
I thought that might.
But let's be realistic here.
Okay.
What are the risks involved in this long-term play?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, execution is key. They need to avoid any production hiccups or delays in getting those new facilities online.
Right.
And they're still vulnerable to, fluctuations in the global economy.
Uh-huh.
A sudden drop in demand for electric vehicles or a global recession could definitely impact their growth trajectory.
So it's not a sure thing.
It's not, no.
But it sounds like MP Materials is a company worth watching closely.
It is.
Before we wrap up this part of our discussion, I
Yeah.
want to step back for a second and make sure our listeners understand why this whole rare earth element thing is such a big deal. We've thrown around a lot of technical terms today.
Yeah, I know we have.
But what's the bottom line for everyday investors?
Okay, so the bottom line is this.
Yeah.
Rare earth elements are basically essential ingredients
Okay.
for a lot of the technologies that are shaping our future.
Interesting.
They're critical for things like clean energy, electric vehicles, advanced electronics, even national defense.
Wow.
And right now, the world is heavily reliant on China for those elements.
Yeah.
So from a geopolitical standpoint, it's incredibly important for the U.S. to diversify its supply chain and develop its own domestic production capabilities.
And MP Materials is right at the forefront of that effort.
Exactly, they are.
This has been incredibly insightful. I feel like I'm starting to grasp the full scope
Yeah.
of this industry and why MP Materials is such a compelling company to follow.
They're doing a lot of interesting things.
Before we move on, are there any other key takeaways
Yeah, sure.
that our listeners should keep in mind?
So one thing to remember is that the rare earth market, it's still relatively young
Okay.
and very volatile.
Right.
There's a lot of hype and speculation out there,
Yeah.
especially around companies like MP Materials, which has seen its stock price fluctuate dramatically in recent months.
Right.
So investors need to be cautious, do their research, and
Yeah.
understand the risks involved
Yeah.
before makes any decisions.
Solid advice. We'll be back after a short break to continue our discussion of MP Materials. We'll be diving into some specific investment strategies,
Okay.
analyzing their financials, and exploring the potential risks and rewards
Sounds good.
of investing in this dynamic company. Stay tuned.
So before the break, we were talking about those potential risks and rewards of investing in MP Materials.
Right.
That company that's really right at the forefront of this whole rare earth element industry.
Yeah.
So let's dive into some specific investment strategies.
Okay.
Taking into account those different time horizons and risk tolerances.
Yeah, I think a lot of our listeners are really interested in that kind of actionable advice.
Right.
So let's break down, those different potential investment scenarios.
Okay, so let's start with like the short-term opportunities.
Okay.
So for people who are looking at like a 1 to 3 month horizon,
Mm-hmm.
there is like potential for some quick gains,
Okay.
but it does come with, higher risk.
Sure.
That momentum that we've been seeing,
Yeah.
driven by those, strong earnings, those whispers about those potential tariffs on those Chinese imports
Yeah.
and all that buzz around that U.S.-Ukraine deal.
Right.
That could push the stock ticker symbol MP
Yeah.
even higher, maybe even into like the $26 range or beyond.
So for investors who are comfortable with some volatility
Right.
and are looking for like those potential quick wins, the short-term outlook might be appealing.
Yeah, you could say that.
But what about those who prefer a more steady,
Yeah.
less, adrenaline pumping approach?
Yeah. Okay, so for those with like a midterm outlook, let's say like 6 to 12 months,
Okay.
MP Materials, strong fundamentals,
Uh-huh.
and that potential for like, favorable policy changes
Yeah.
all point toward like continued growth
Interesting.
as they scale up production at those new facilities, especially, that Fort Worth facility
Uh-huh.
that's producing those high-value NVP magnets.
Yeah.
We could see the stock climb, toward $30 or higher.
Okay, so a bit less of a gamble than that short-term play.
Yeah.
But, with the potential for those more sustainable returns.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, I know some of our listeners are in it for the long haul.
Right.
What does the long-term picture look like for MP Materials?
Okay.
Say 2 to 3 years out.
The long-term outlook for MP Materials is where things get really exciting.
Yeah.
If they can execute on their like ambitious plans,
Uh-huh.
expand their production capacity,
Uh-huh.
and navigate, that geopolitical landscape effectively, they are really poised to capitalize on that long-term growth of
Yeah.
this rare earth element in market.
Interesting.
Some analysts are even predicting that the stock could reach $100
Wow.
within the next few years.
$100.
Yeah, $100.
That's a significant return.
It is.
But let's be realistic here.
Okay.
What are some of the risks that investors should consider
Right.
with this long-term play?
Of course, like no investment is without risk.
Right.
While MP Materials has a lot going for it, they still need to execute flawlessly.
Okay.
Any delays in getting those new facilities up and running or, any unexpected production hiccups could really impact their growth trajectory.
And we have to factor in like the global economy as well, right?
Of course.
What happens if demand for electric vehicles or renewable energy slows down?
Absolutely. A global recession or, a sudden drop in demand for those technologies that rely on rare earth elements could definitely, put a dent in their plans.
So while the long-term potential is definitely enticing, investors need to be aware of those inherent risks in
Right.
such a volatile market.
For sure.
Okay, I think we've covered, the various investment scenarios.
Yeah, I think so.
Now, before we move on, I want to talk about MP Materials financials.
Okay.
Can you give us just a quick overview
Sure.
of their key financial metrics?
Okay, let's take a look at their most recent earnings report, which covers like the fourth quarter of 2024.
Okay.
They reported revenue of $112.1 million,
Okay.
which actually exceeded analyst expectations.
Wow.
Their gross profit came in at $45.2 million,
Okay.
and they achieved a net income of $33.5 million,
Okay.
translating to an earnings per share of 21 cents.
Those are some pretty impressive numbers.
Yeah, they're doing well.
What were some of the key drivers
Okay.
behind this strong performance?
So their strong performance can really be attributed to, a number of factors.
Okay.
First, they've been successfully like ramping up production at their Mountain Pass mine in California,
Okay.
which is currently, the only operating rare earth mine in the United States.
And that gives them a pretty distinct advantage
Oh, yeah, for sure.
in the current geopolitical climate.
Huge advantage.
Yeah.
The push for that domestic sourcing of critical materials is a significant tailwind for them.
And secondly,
Their expansion into like downstream processing
Okay.
with that new Fort Worth facility is starting to pay off.
okay,
They're now producing those high-value NDP magnets,
right.
which command, much higher margins than just selling, raw rare earth materials.
Right, so they're not just mining the materials, they're adding value
Exactly.
through processing and manufacturing.
Yeah,
That's a smart strategy.
it is.
Anything else driving their financial success?
Well, they've also been benefiting from, favorable pricing trends in the rare earth market.
Okay.
Demand for these materials is strong,
Uh-huh.
and supply is still relatively constrained,
Right.
which has allowed them to command those premium prices.
So they're firing on all cylinders, so to speak.
Yeah, you could say that.
Strong production, strategic expansion, favorable market conditions.
Mm-hmm.
It's all coming together for them.
They're in a good spot.
So we've talked about those potential investment scenarios.
Yeah.
We've looked at their financials.
Yep.
We've discussed some of those risks and opportunities.
Uh-huh.
Before we wrap up our discussion of MP Materials, I want to touch on one more aspect,
Okay.
the ethical considerations surrounding rare earth element mining.
Yeah, that's an important point. Mining in general can have, environmental and social impacts,
Sure,
and rare earth mining is no exception.
of course.
It's really crucial for companies like MP Materials to really prioritize those sustainable and responsible practices.
Absolutely. What are some of the key ethical concerns
Okay.
associated with rare earth mining,
All right.
and what is MP Materials doing to address them?
So one of the primary concerns is, the potential for environmental damage.
Okay.
Rare earth deposits are often found in areas with really sensitive ecosystems,
Right.
and the mining process can generate waste products
Uh-huh.
that need to be managed carefully.
Right.
MP Materials has implemented a number of measures to kind of mitigate these risks,
Okay.
including, a closed-loop water system to minimize their water usage,
Okay.
and a comprehensive waste management program.
That's good.
They also have reclamation plans in place to restore the land after mining is complete.
What about social impacts?
Okay.
Are there any concerns regarding labor practices or community relations?
MP Materials is really committed to, those ethical labor practices, and they work really closely with the local community to ensure that, their operations benefit that surrounding area.
Okay.
They provide jobs, they support local businesses,
Mhm.
they invest in community development projects.
Good.
They also have a strong safety record
Okay.
and prioritize the well-being of their employees.
So it sounds like they're taking steps to address both the environmental and social aspects
Yeah, they are.
of their operations.
And, transparency is key. They actually publish these sustainability reports outlining their environmental, social, and governance performance,
Okay.
which allows investors to assess, their progress and hold them accountable.
That's important for investors.
It is.
Who are increasingly, focused on those ESG factors when they're making their investment decisions.
Absolutely.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground today, from investment strategies to financial performance to ethical considerations.
We have.
Before we wrap up our discussion of MP Material, is there anything else our listeners should keep in mind?
Yeah, I think the key takeaway here is that MP Materials is a company with enormous potential.
Yeah.
But it's operating in a very complex and dynamic industry.
For sure.
Investors need to be aware of both the opportunities and the risks, and they need to, do their own research before making any investment decisions.
Great advice. It's been a fascinating conversation exploring the world of rare earth elements and MP Materials' place in it. I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot more about them in the months and years to come. Yeah, I think you've given our listeners a lot to think about.
Yeah, hopefully.
MP Materials is clearly a company at the forefront of, this really crucial industry
It is.
with a pretty compelling growth story.
Definitely.
To wrap things up, let's go back to, those key takeaways we discussed.
Okay.
What are the most important things that investors should remember about MP Materials?
Okay, so first and foremost, MP Materials is the only player in U.S. rare earth mining and processing right there.
Right.
They hold this really unique position
Yeah.
in a market that's only becoming more important as demand for these elements continues to grow.
And they're not just mining the raw materials.
No, they're not.
They're moving further down that value chain
Right.
by producing, those high-value NDP magnets.
Exactly. Their vertical integration strategy gives them more control,
Yeah.
over their production and their pricing, which lets them capture more profit along the way.
And let's not forget, the potential impact of those, favorable policy changes that we talked about.
Right. Those are huge.
The push to reduce our reliance on China and bolster, domestic production of rare earths could be a huge tailwind for MP Materials.
Absolutely. They're in a great position to benefit from all these geopolitical shifts.
But of course, no investment is without risk.
Right. Of course not.
We have to acknowledge, the potential for execution challenges, economic downturns, and those policy changes that could impact their growth.
Yeah, those are big factors.
That's why it's so important for investors to do their due diligence, understand the company's financials,
Yep.
and really assess, those potential risks and rewards
Right.
before making any investment decision.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well said. This has been a really informative look into MP Materials.
It has been.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us.
My pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this exploration of MP Materials and this fascinating world of rare earth elements. If you're interested in learning more about MP Materials, their stock ticker symbol is MP.
MP.
We encourage you to do your own research and, stay informed about this really dynamic industry. Don't forget to subscribe to Investing Talk Podcast and share this episode with anyone who might be interested. We'd also love to hear your thoughts on MP Materials and the future of rare earth elements. Leave us a comment below and join the conversation. Thanks for tuning in.